Today we're beginning a series on Habakkuk, a book you probably haven't studied much if you're like most Christians. Habakkuk tends to get lost among the pages of the Old Testament and forgotten about. But this minor prophet has some things to say that speak into our lives today. So we're going to take a look at the context of the book first. To understand Habakkuk, we need to recall Josiah, King Josiah. He was a boy king. He took the throne at age 8. And at age 16, he turned toward God. 2 Chronicles 34 tells us he began to seek the God of his father David. So by the time he was 20, Josiah was actively tearing down idols and their high places. He was destroying the altars of the false gods and burning the bones of the heathen priest. He was purging the land of Judah. Now, Josiah continued to gain respect and love for God, and he sought out God. When he was 26, he began repairing the temple. And after finding the last book of the law, he led his people into repentance and revival. And throughout his lifetime, the people worshipped God. They celebrated the feast, they obeyed his commands, they loved the Lord. But as you can guess, after Josiah passed, the people of God began to return to their own ways. Now Habakkuk, who some scholars think may have lived in the final years of Josiah, we're not sure, but he certainly would have known of this great revival. And he would have seen the subsequent fall of Judah into the evil that so characterized their nation. And because of that, he was a deeply sorrowful prophet. He watched as the people of Judah slipped away into complete disregard for God and his ways. He was disturbed by the evil. He longed for God to come and set things back to how they used to be, back to the faithfulness of the people as they were when Josiah was leading the nation. He wanted them to come back to when they worshiped God. So this is where we find him, sorrowful, confused, longing for revival. Here in these 3 short chapters, we find a dialogue between God and Habakkuk, a back and forth conversation which reveals the future of Judah and portrays to the readers a moving of Habakkuk's heart from unrest and frustration into trusting God more completely and more joyfully. Now, verse 1 of chapter 1 tells us that this book is an oracle. And an oracle means burden. So verse 1 reads, the burden which Habakkuk the prophet saw. Now what a burden it was. God was not revealing peace and joy to him. The revelation received by Habakkuk was not a pleasant one, as we'll see as we journey through the verses. Things had gotten so bad in Judah that Habakkuk cried out to God in heartbreaking mourning. Listen to verses 2 to 4 again. How long, Lord, will I cry out for help, and you not hear? I cry out to you violence, yet you do not save. Why do you make me see iniquity and cause me to look upon wickedness? Yes, destruction and violence are before me. Strife exists and contention arises. Therefore the law is ignored and justice is never upheld. For the wicked surround the righteous, and therefore justice comes out perverted. Wow. Can you see our world in the echoes of Habakkuk's cry? Are we in the modern world any different? When we turn on our televisions or scroll through our social media feeds, do we see the faded images of Judah's sins in the reflection of our own screens? Do we feel the same type of pain Habakkuk felt as he looked around his world and saw all the wickedness and the disregard for God? Do we cry out, "How long, Lord? And why do you make me see iniquity?" Are we disturbed by the perversion of justice and the scenes of violence and destruction that flash across our vision every day? Can we see and understand Habakkuk's questions? You know, one of the great things about God is his ability to hear us just rail at him, just shout at him with our questions and our hurts and our anger, and yet not stop loving us. The Bible is full of examples of folks who came to God crying out their pain and their questions and their torment. People like David and Jeremiah and Job and Hannah and Moses. We call these cries laments, and they have a place in our spiritual development. When we lament, God hears our cries. He listens to our wailing. He helps us work through our pain and come out of our struggles stronger and more mature. In our honesty before God, he allows us to heal and to grow. In these verses, that's what Habakkuk was doing. He was so frustrated with everything in the world. He was frustrated at God. He was broken over the wickedness he saw. He wanted answers. And so he laments. In verses 5 through 11, God gives Habakkuk an answer. And I'm pretty sure that Habakkuk wished he could take back the questions. Now, verse 5 begins with God replying to Habakkuk, "Look at the nations, observe, be astonished, wonder, because I am doing something in your days you would not believe if you were told." Now, that doesn't sound too bad, right? At this point, Habakkuk probably started to relax a little bit, thinking, okay, God got this. It's probably going to send another Josiah, right? Lead the way back to righteousness. Nothing to stress about. When I read verse 5, it recalls to my mind Isaiah 43:19, when God says, "Behold, I will do something new." And then he goes on to say, "I will make rivers in the desert and roadways in the wilderness. Great things are in store." But that's not what God is saying here. God's next words strike terror into Habakkuk's heart. From verses 6 down through 11, we get a glimpse into God's something. God tells Habakkuk that he is raising up the Chaldeans to invade Judah. And that phrase is enough to petrify Habakkuk. The Chaldeans was another name for the Babylonians, and that name will ring a bell with you, right? They were a horrible, violent nation who worked their way through country after country, capturing and torturing people, destroying everything and anyone who got in their way. They were a brutal nation. They had no respect for life or for God, and they represented evil, and they were greatly feared. Listen to verses 6 through 11a again. "For behold, I am raising up the Chaldeans, that fierce and impetuous people, who march throughout the earth to seize dwelling places which are not theirs. They are dreaded and feared. Their justice and authority originate with themselves. Their horses are swifter than leopards, and keener than wolves in the evening. Their horsemen come galloping. Their horsemen come from afar. They fly like an eagle swooping down to devour. All of them come for violence. Their horde of faces moves forward. They collect captives like sand. They mock at kings, and rulers are a laughing matter to them. They laugh at every fortress and heap up rubble to capture it. Then they will sweep through like the wind and pass on. Habakkuk would have been shaken to the core to hear those words. God's answer brought him more fear and more despair and more questions than he had before. How could God allow a nation even more evil than Judah to conquer Judah and almost wipe the nation out? How could so evil a nation help Judah come back to God? Now, if I were Habakkuk, I would be sick to my stomach, guaranteed, to hear that. My teeth would be chattering, my knees would be knocking in faint. I would be terrified of what was to come. Just the thought of all the killing and the rape and the torture the inhabitants would have to endure, the destruction of their homes and of their land, the security of the people wiped out, and then on top of that, the feeling that God had forsaken them. I'm sure Habakkuk must have thought, how in the world does this make sense? I know Judah needs to be disciplined, Lord, but the Chaldeans? I just don't get it. He had to be overwhelmed by this burden. But you know, even in the midst of that terrible proclamation, God gives one little sliver of hope. In verse 11, part B, he says, "But they will be held guilty, they whose strength is their God." Although God floors Habakkuk with this news that his people will be suffering intensely, God also stops to reassure him that the Babylonians are not going to get away with it. They will also pay for their sins. But is it enough? Is the promise that God will deal harshly with the enemy enough to soothe and calm a troubled Habakkuk? Well, in verse 12 we read, "Are you not from everlasting, O Lord, my God, my Holy One? We will not die. You, O Lord, have appointed them to judge, and you, O Rock, have established them to correct." Now, some scholars believe that this verse is sarcastic, that Habakkuk is really expressing this repressed anger in a mocking manner. Aren't you an everlasting God? That's the best you can do. But you know what? I don't see it that way. What I see is the battle that Habakkuk is having while he sorts through the information that God has dumped on him and his knowledge of who God is, the character of God. And there's a battle going on in his heart and his soul and his mind. He knows God is who he says he is. He is everlasting. He is a personal God who has shown compassion through the years. He is holy. He is just. He is a rock. He is steadfast and reliable. He knows the character of God. And he's trying to reconcile that with God's announcement. And that's why he can say, "We will not die." Habakkuk knows that God has promised his people that they will be a blessing to all nations. And if God were going to come and wipe them out completely, that promise would never be fulfilled. And God is not going to renege on a promise. There would always be a remnant left to carry out that promise. So they're not all going to die, and he's sure about that. But we can see his confusion as he continues on in verse 13. "Your eyes are too pure to approve evil. You can't look on wickedness with favor." See, he knows the holiness of God. And then he says, "Why do you look with favor on those who deal treacherously? Why are you silent when the wicked swallow up those more righteous than they?" His struggle is with how God can use something so devastating to bring about Judah's ultimate good. And this battle is just raging within him. And you know, sometimes I think we do the same thing. When we go through severe trials, we wobble between this knowledge of who God is, of his character, and the pain and the reality of our circumstances. minute we're proclaiming God's goodness, the next we are once again questioning what in the world is going on. Are you even there? Are you listening? Why are you making me go through this? It reminds me of the father in the story in Mark 9:24. And he cries out, I do believe. Help my unbelief. Habakkuk's struggle is our struggle. And that's why it is so important for us to know who God is personally. So when these times of trouble come, and when the carpet is just pulled out from under us, and we're grasping for breath, and we can say, I believe, even if our next words are, help my unbelief. Next, Habakkuk paints us a picture of fish swimming in the water. The fish are minding their own business, and suddenly they're hooked and they're being gathered into nets and hauled in. And here he's once again reflecting on the brutality of the coming enemy. He remarks, you know what, God, they celebrate their wickedness. They enjoy all this feasting after they've killed. They worship the tools that they use for evil. And they never seem to be satiated. And Habakkuk wonders, will this ever end? And that's how chapter 1 ends. On a strange note, with Habakkuk pondering the injustice of it all. And we're not going to stop there. We're not going to end our time together today with that verse, but we're going to read the next verse in chapter 2. It says, I will stand on my guard post. I will station myself on the rampart. I will keep watch to see what he will speak to me and how I may reply when I am reproved. Habakkuk is waiting for the Lord to respond. And sometimes that's the best thing that we can do. To wait, to watch, to ponder his character, and listen for his voice. When our world is turned upside down, we can still know that God is near. And we have the assurance that all things work together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purposes. So the message that I hear coming from chapter 1 is be honest with God. Lament your pain and your sorrow. Be open before him. Allow him to converse with you. But at the same time, don't give up on who you know God is. Because God's ways are so much higher than ours. His thoughts are so much greater. And sometimes he allows things to happen that just shake us to the core. And it confuses us. And it makes us wonder, what is happening? What are you doing? But you see, God's character tells us that he is a good God. That he is a good Father. So even in our darkest days, when we don't understand, we need to be honest and trust him. We need to keep on believing. Keep on waiting, just like Habakkuk. As we go into meditation this afternoon, we're going to be singing Psalm 6.